Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Empowering Musicians podcast. And I am your host, Michael Manley, and I'm very pleased to be welcoming an amazing, multi-talented, multidisciplined artist with us today, Paula Yoo. And Paula is not only an author, she's also a screenwriter and a working musician. So welcome to the show, Paula.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, and happy, I guess, Catter Day, because I have 3 cats, so hopefully they won't interrupt us.
Yes. Well, there's a cat that lives in my house too, but I don't think he's in the living room. So yes, happy Catter Day to all the cat owners out there. And so one thing I wanted to get into later is just the fact that, this podcast is really about creatives, but it's also about how do you monetize that? How do you make a career in your chosen path? And we had talked before we started about how we're all working artists, and there's a huge transformative, hopefully in a positive way, strike that's happening in Hollywood right now with both the writers and the actors. And I don't know where the crew is as far as IATSE and their process, but it's pretty much throughout the industry, and you're kind of like touched by that. And so would love to talk to you more about that later. But first, how do you become a writer and a screenwriter and a musician? What does that path look like?
It came in many different ways. I think both music and writing happened about the same time. So I think it was writing first. I was in the first grade and I read Charlotte's Web. I'm sure we've all read Charlotte's Web, and I reread that book like 100 times. I just read it, and I actually still have the old copy back at my parents' house. The spine is all worn down and you can see the threads holding the papers together. But I fell in love with Charlotte because she was a writer. So I instantly started writing because I wanted to be like Charlotte. And the story I always tell is that I wrote my first novel when I was 7 years old, and I sent it out to a publisher called Harper & Row because they published a lot of children's books that I read. And they sent me back a very nice letter saying, "Dear Paula, you're a very talented child writer. You should maybe send a story, and we have a children's writing contest for kids ages 7 to 10. And I ripped up the letter and I started crying. And my parents were like, "Why are you? Well, this was a wonderful letter." And I said, "I'm not a child writer. I'm a real writer."
I love that.
Yeah. So I didn't take rejection well. And I tell this story because about 34 years later, Harper & Row became HarperCollins, and they published my first novel, my first young adult novel called Good Enough. So I am good enough.
Oh,
And it was based, and then this is how it transitions to music, is that this is a young adult, kind of a rom-com, story about identity, race, and also just, trying to figure out what you want to do, what you love versus being successful. And it also deals with the model minority myth and anti-Asian racism. But I use a lot of humor to explore these serious issues. And it's based a lot on my life as a concertmaster of the Greater Hartford Youth Orchestra, all state auditions, when I played the Mendelssohn with my youth orchestra, and
wow.
and the cute boy that I was in love with. And I actually met him at our 25th high school reunion. So that was kind of fun.
Oh, what a fantastic
yeah, it was a wonderful reunion. But anyway, so that's kind of how. And what I was going to say was HarperCollins. Yeah, that was the one who they published my first book. So I tell that story to let people know that whether you want to be a musician or a writer, you're going to face a lot of rejection in your life, and you have to take those rejections and think of them more as a positive thing, because they help you in your craft on how to succeed. And it's all about persistence, hard work, and talent is maybe about that much in terms of having a sustainable career. And just going to my music was, in addition to writing, I started playing the violin in the first grade. I did the Suzuki method, and I was on Captain Kangaroo when I was in the first grade. I played a little Bach minuet. And, so music and writing were kind of like the same thing to me. So it was just a way of expressing myself. I think the reason why I became a full-time writer, and really at this point, music is more of a part-time freelance gig for me. It's the world's most expensive hobby. Really good party trick. But the reason why I went more into writing was because I think with music, I love playing music, and I can improv, little solos with rock bands and things like that, but I can't write a concerto. My music theory is terrible. I can't write a symphony, but I can write a novel. I can write books. I can write screenplays. And so I wanted my voice and my vision to come out through my books. So I would say that my books and my screenplays and my journalism, all that I do as a writer, reflects what I'm thinking and where my brain is. And music is how I express my emotion. And it just something that feeds my soul. So I can't live without one or the other. And I think that I think really successful writers, really successful artists or musicians, I think we have to have a diversity or a variety of stuff that we love doing, because that I take a very holistic viewpoint when it comes to whatever your discipline is in art. So
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm similar in that when I wanted to explore creativity, I started writing myself, but I didn't write music. I was really intimidated by the fact, and also not interested in writing sound, but I was like really into writing words. But yet I feel the same way. Like, we're both musicians and we love to play. I also wanted to ask you, because this is something I talk about, which is that especially in the very competitive world of like orchestral music, that it's very athletic and not as much creative, because we don't have a lot of leeway, right? The conductor's telling you what to play, even sometimes how to play it. You may have a solo where you get to be expressive, but writing and composing are much more creative versus being interpretive art forms. So it's interesting that you found writing and to be more for your intellectual side and also your creative side versus your emotional side.
Yeah, and well, actually, I will say the music is what makes my writing emotional, because at the end of the day, my books are always about, they're what people have called smart with heart. Because you can't, so it's not like what I write is totally intellectual. It's very, I come from a very emotional place, but I think the emotion comes from my violin training, from my love of music. It kind of infuses the right brain, left brain. It all kind of comes together. And I do love what you say about being an athlete, because that is another thing people don't realize with musicianship. It's a lot of, scales and practicing. I've got my biceps from the bow arm, and as you get older, you have to start doing yoga and you have to stretch out before you pick up the violin. So, and with writing, you're pretty sedentary. So I definitely, we are a lot like athletes in terms of how we train.
Yeah, and I play here and there when I'm called, but it's just, even staying in shape is a lot of unpaid work, right? Just to even stay in condition. And people don't understand that it's very physical what we do. It's not visible. A lot of the muscular motion is subtle, and it's not like what you see when you watch somebody playing baseball. But when you're out of shape, you're out of shape, and you really have to get back into shape. And I'm dealing with that now. I've got a community group I play with, and our first rehearsal's tomorrow. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I gotta get myself together here, because I'm not, I haven't been playing every day for a little while, and I'm like, oh, gotta get it together here.
It's so fascinating you mentioned that, because I was just talking to my stand partner in the Vicente Chamber Orchestra, where it's a volunteer group that I play in, and we both were practicing yesterday. We're doing Rachmaninoff Piano Concerto No. 3 with Talon Smith and the Brahms Symphony No. 2, and I was practicing, and I'm not quite at college level anymore, but it's a good party trick. I can still, the muscle memory is there. But I noticed in the past few years, I got a pinched nerve. I had to do physical therapy. My hands went numb. And I noticed that when I did pick up the violin, my arm would get really tight, because I really needed to warm up more. But since I've been striking, and because I'm also a member of the AFM, I've been bringing my violin out to the picket lines, because I figure might as well kill two birds with one stone and get some practice time in. So I've just been playing Celtic fiddle tunes and Led Zepp and easy wedding music. And I didn't realize it's like the Rocky sequence, because yesterday when I was practicing, I thought, oh, I'm going to have to really warm up because this is difficult music. I'm kind of almost getting back to college level, because I realized, since May 1st, I've been playing on the picket line. So it's almost like I have been exercising more than I realized. So I just think it's a funny coincidence you mentioned that.
Yeah, that's amazing. And music on a picket line, like, that's the one thing we can do as musicians. And I almost think that we should have much more presence on the WGA and SAG-AFTRA picket lines with music now, because our scoring musicians are going to be fighting for the same thing, right? Like, and it's all, and we'll talk a little bit about this in a minute, but like the structure of how people get paid in that industry. Now, so you're an author, but you're also, and I guess they're both authors, right? But you're an author and a screenwriter. And so WGA, Writers Guild of America, is representing screenwriters mainly, right?
Yeah.
So when you publish paper novels or your books are not, is that Writers Guild work also?
This I can explain. So books are not covered by the WGA. So I can sell another book. I can keep working. I'm actually working on the copy edits for my next book coming out. And that's not scabbing, because that has nothing to do with the WGA. So I think what people get confused about is the reason why we have a union, the Writers Guild, is because screenwriters and TV writers and TV producers, the people that write the scripts, we do not own the copyright, which is why sometimes you see multiple names when they say this screenplay was written by, you'll see story by, teleplay by, and then you often hear about so-and-so sold a movie, but then they got taken off the project and they brought in a famous, A-list screenwriter to do a page one rewrite. That's because we don't own the copyright. So the reason why we unionized many, many years ago was to protect the writers, since we don't own the copyright. I used to be a newspaper reporter. Before I started doing books, I was a reporter for the Seattle Times and the Detroit News and People magazine. And we also, as reporters, do not own the copyright to our articles, the Detroit News does, or the newspaper does. So in 1995, I actually was 26 years old. That was my first strike. I was with the Detroit Newspaper Guild, which was part of the local 22 AFL-CIO. So that was my first strike. And then I was in the 2007 WGA strike, and I'm here again today. But so that's it in a nutshell as to why. That's why we have certain minimums in terms to protect people. Like when you sell a screenplay, there's a base minimum. You got to make X amount of money no matter what, and then your agents try to raise it and think, raise your quote and stuff. But we're protected that way. So that's how I'm able to do both. And I only got into TV writing in the year 2002. I actually was a journalist for many years, as I just mentioned, and I quit in 2002 because I realized I quit in 2000 because I was like, I really want to go back and write that great American novel. And so I got my master's in creative writing, and I was working and I was teaching part-time at Glendale Community College in Santa Monica, just teaching composition. And that's when a friend said, oh, you are such a TV, you watch TV and movies all the time. You're such a nerd about it. I can't believe you're not writing screenplays. You should try out for the Warner Brothers workshop. So I was like, oh, I've never written a script before. So I just did it for fun. I actually wrote an angel spec while my husband and I were out camping. And I literally wrote it out on, all I knew was that the dialogue went in the middle of the page, and that a page was a minute of dialogue. So I just hand wrote out a thing, and then I typed it up on Microsoft Word. I didn't even know what Final Draft was. And I sent it out just for fun. And I thought, oh, that's cool. I've never written a script before. That's really sweet. And then 3 months later, they called and they said, we start in January. You're in the program. And I was like, oh my God, okay. And then that's kind of how it happened. And then my first staff job was with the West Wing. So that's just a little detour to let you know why I've been in the Writers Guild since 2002. So I've been basically balancing, when I'm writing my books, I'm doing that. And then when the books are published, I staff on a show or sell a pilot. And in between all of that, when a show gets canceled or I get rejected for my next book, because you still get rejected, here we go. I play music. So
yeah,
like I said, you gotta hustle. You gotta hustle.
Yeah. A true freelancer. And so when you say you wrote an Angel spec, does that mean a spec script for the show Angel? Was it Angel, the show? Was that the name of the show?
Yeah. Back then I was a big fan of, things. I'm a horror fan. So I really enjoyed Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel. Yeah. And actually the spec script that I wrote, the spec script is kind of like, it's not something that they would film or they would air, but it's like, if you could write an episode of Angel, what would you do? So I wrote about Paganini's ghost and a haunted fiddle. So when you played, it would kind of, the spirit would, take over you, and then you'd kill people, and he had to stop you. They had to get the violin back. So it's like, write what you know, right? And I guess that really caught the attention of a lot of people, because I think when it comes to violin, and that's the thing, when I play on the picket line, I think what really moves me emotionally is I've had people come up to me and say, I've never heard a violin live up close. I didn't realize how loud it was. I didn't realize like the tone, and this is the coolest thing ever. And it's because, this is a whole other conversation about arts education and music education just being dismantled in the 80s. We have a brand new generation of grown-ups who don't have proper music education, and it breaks my heart. So I figure, hey, maybe they'll go to an orchestra concert now because of this, and so I do like that as well. I find that very moving.
Yeah, and it's such a great impact. And we as musicians, like in Las Vegas, we have a union that's called the Culinary Union, and they represent a lot of folks that work in hotels and casinos. I think they have 60,000 members in Las Vegas, and they're very highly organized. When they have an action, they'll have 4,000 people on the street. And like, if we have 5 musicians show up, it's like, well, that doesn't really make a difference, right? It doesn't move the dime. But if we have 5 musicians with instruments that show up, like, that makes a difference, because we can amplify our power, because people are like, oh, music on a picket line. Like, it's a really transformative thing when you show up on a picket line with instruments. And I think it's great that you're doing that.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, and also a lot of the wonderful AFM musicians, my fellow AFM members, they've also been joining. We've had saxophone, trumpet, drums, different types of percussion, other, double bass, and so it's been fun. So I jokingly, my little pet name for whatever ragtag group gets together, we call ourselves the Picketeers. So
I love it. I think my good friend and other guest that I've had on the show, Edmund Velasco, may have been out there. I know he's down in Orange County, but he's been really supportive. He's the president of our local down there, Local 7.
that's crazy.
So one quick arts question, a very nerdy writing question. So script writing is so different than writing a novel, because writing a novel and I was interested in writing for the stage, like, for whatever reason, because I think it was like music. It was about language, and it was about sound and rhythm and the interplay of that. And in a film, it's much more about the visuals. So did you have trouble adjusting to, like, the fact that writing a novel is all about how you put words together, and writing a screenplay is much more about how is this going to look and how do I describe visuals?
Yeah, it was a little tricky. My work tends to have a lot of dialogue in it, and I think because I was a journalist for so long, I'm very good about structure. You have an exciting lead paragraph, nut graph, and you go into that. So I used a lot of my journalism training in terms of structure for movies, because it's very similar. And the thing about movies and TV shows is they're very, very strict. You only have 42 pages, or 108 pages for a feature, or 90 pages really at this point. There's a very strict page count. Scenes, only the really important scenes should be maybe 2 or 3 pages. Scenes, maybe are like half a page. And you really have to get a lot. And when you do dialogue, it has to show the character's emotional arc, and also reveal new information and keep the story moving forward. So it's very, very mechanical, and it's very, very structure wise. And I think the freedom comes from, it's almost like cracking a puzzle, because almost the creativity comes with, I have half a page to say something important about, this couple's going to break up, or the killer's been caught, or whatever. How do I do that in the most effective way? With novels tend to be more from the mind. They're more interior. So you can have like a really action-packed scene, but then your narrator's like, it reminded me of the meal my mom once made me, and you go into a flashback, or it's more loosey-goosey. And I think that novels are structured, but they're more about voice, because it's a very unique voice. And TV and movies, they do have a distinct voice, but it's much more structured. I hope that helps, but I do think that I do have to switch gears. So when I'm working on a book and I have to go back to a pilot or a staff TV show, I have to admit, it takes a couple of weeks for me to kind of switch gears. And then same with when I go back to books, and also because it's about pacing. What may seem like a gradual and organic pacing of a story in a screenplay, it's like the roadrunner in a novel. I've had my editor agent say, well, Paula, I can tell you just got off a TV show. You can save chapter 4 for chapter 8. Slow down.
Yeah.
And so forth. So that, I think, is really the technical difference.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. And do you have any favorite? Because we're in this really interesting moment with scripted television, because there was this explosion of everybody that said, okay, we need a ton of content, and some really quirky stuff has gotten made. And I just wonder, what are some of your favorite things that maybe you either written for or that you haven't written for?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, my first TV job was on The West Wing, so that it was downhill after. No, I'm just kidding. It's like you know, my first year as a staff writer, I'm on stage for the Emmys because we
Wow,
won.
that's
You know,
crazy.
yeah, and I'm on the front page of the LA Times with all the actors and this photo that came out. So it was a real Cinderella moment. Is when you get back into your like, old Nissan, you drive home. you
Yeah.
know, it's like, but yeah, so that was amazing, and I really learned a lot from that show. And I'm very grateful that that was my first stepping stone. I would say I've worked on just a lot of different shows, but some of the shows I worked on were sci-fi shows. Even though I'm not a science fiction writer, I'm a sci-fi geek, but I write character. I tend to write very realistic, contemporary, like character-based stuff. So I often got hired on sci-fi shows because, oh, she knows the language, she knows the mythology of sci-fi, but she can do more of the character work. So I ended up working for shows like Eureka on Sci-Fi. So that was a lot of fun, and Supergirl on the CW. And I will say that specifically those two shows were a lot of fun just because I got to work with special effects. So it's 3 in the morning and some guy is on a tight wire, like barreling down and smashing into a fake concrete wall. Or I got to see my first car explosion. I
Oh,
got to
wow.
see Supergirl on the green screen, up on wires flying. I got to see her fly. So I think that's a lot of fun. The one bad thing about doing sci-fi or any show that has a lot of special effects is now all I see are dollar signs. It's like $250 for every gun muzzle blast, or, it costs $6,000 for Supergirl to fly. So when you watch a show, I'm like, oh, she's walking in that scene because we had to save $6,000. So
Oh
whenever
my
I
God.
watch science fiction now, I'm like, that was $1,000. That was $100,000. Oh my God, I can't believe they got that in the budget. So I just see dollar signs pop up everywhere.
That's crazy. That's funny. Well, I think I actually find that scripted streaming media has been more interesting in a lot of ways than film lately. And I think it's because there's been this creative freedom. And my newest obsession is a show called Mrs. Davis, which is on Peacock.
I want to
And
see that. Yeah.
it's so odd and weird, and you're like, how did this even get greenlit? Because it's so bizarre and almost novelistic, and very, very challenging, and like intellectual and layered. And I'm just like, how did this, and but very funny at the same time. And you're like, how did this get on the air? Because this is the kind of show that will probably never get made again, once things calm down with this, now that things are consolidating, and not every script in the world is getting produced, right?
Yeah, I think that's, and I was actually just thinking, you mentioned culinary. I love The Bear. It's like reading a beautiful literary novel. And yeah, and I would say part of the reason why you're starting to see more original shows is because there's only 8 to 10 episodes for a season. So I think they're actually written a little bit more like a novel. They're more serialized. Up until recently with streaming, TV was always the broadcast model because the average TV writer, I'm sorry, the average TV viewer only watched a TV show once every 4 episodes. So a lot of shows had to be, you're the mom or dad, you're tired, you put the kids to bed, you got an hour before you crash to go to work the next day and send the kids off to school. Oh, it's Law and Order. I haven't seen that in a few weeks. Boom, standalone episode.
Mhm.
And that's why there was always a case of the week. And they made it very easy to follow whatever the soap opera, continual storylines were. It was very easy. And I think that TV habits started to change. People started watching on their phones, on their iPads, on their computers. People started just binge watching like all 8 episodes at once. So it's like it's like spending the whole afternoon reading a whole book from cover to cover. So that's a new way of experiencing art and TV and all of that, which I think is cool because I think that it did give rise to, I think, more of these original, quirky, shorter shows. The problem is is, as with peak TV in the golden age, it got a little confusing. To this day, I still am like, where is this show streaming? I always have to put that in because I can't remember if it's on Hulu or HBO Max. And if only we had a box that could just have everything on, it's like,
Yeah.
So I think that it's also how people consume entertainment has changed as well, and that's why we're here, unfortunately, because I think everything just we kind of hit a tipping point.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned the bear. I mean, especially in the second season, it's very novelistic in its structure. And, there's a whole episodes are only about one character, or they go different places in time. And I found that show so intense, like almost like a novel. Like I could read it, like I couldn't binge that show. It was too intense. I loved it, but it was like one episode at a time because it was like the layered dialogue and all of it was so tense at times.
It's actually, I'm sorry, it's really interesting you say that, because I've been hearing like from psychologists and different articles that one of the problems with binge watching is that you don't get to reflect. Your subconscious doesn't have a week to kind of reflect and think. So when you go the next week to see the next episode that's dropped or airs on broadcast TV, you've had time to really digest your food. So you're ready for the next meal. And the next episode that you watch is much more meaningful. And so, if you ask me to tell you everything that happened in the Bear first season, I have to really think about it. But yet I can tell you everything in the last six seasons of Buffy, or, so I do think that binge watching, although it's fun to do, I too have kind of stopped doing it because I'm like, I'm not really processing it. And I think that's part of our society and culture because we're so fast these days. Mm-hmm. We're not taking time. And I think in a way, lockdown during the pandemic really forced a lot of people to kind of bake some sourdough bread and, slow down.
Yeah, exactly. I just want to say we've got some comments. Bill says, hi, Mike. Paula is a great and interesting guest. So thanks, Bill, for watching. If you have a question, you can always put it in the comments. And so this brings us to my next subject, which is as positive as the streaming platform kind of way we consume TV has changed things in a positive direction creatively in terms of what's getting made and stuff. It's also had transformative effects on how people make money, right? So as you said, authors of books own their copyright, but you don't own a copyright in writing for media. And so for people that may not understand, why is it different that somebody who wrote for Buffy is going to get paid differently than somebody who might write for The Mandalorian now that's a streaming show?
Yeah, and the math, please forgive me, I'm also a little in the dark on all of that. I can talk about the cable experience, which is in cable TV for sci-fi, our minimums for writing the same number of pages was much lower than what you would write for broadcast. So even there was a difference there, and then I think with streaming, I think there's a lot of math in that, but I will say that I've gotten flat fees. There was a Netflix show, I got a flat fee, and I thought at the time, ooh, this is great. I need the money. I'm between shows. This is going to be a great thing. And I ended up co-writing, pretty much co-writing 25 episodes. I haven't seen a single residual for it, or I haven't seen it because it was a flat fee. And so they're starting to do that because it's a little sneaky. And looking back, I'm like, I kind of regret that. I think that part of it is that, sometimes you're willing to take with the lower money. You think, well, it is a credit. It's a credit on a beautiful show, a prestige show that's streaming. So, and that is true. It is nice to have good credits on your resume, but I think there's exploitation happening with that, where the price is too low, and then it's a little bit like, well, that's great, it's on your resume, but resumes don't pay the bills. You've got to. There's a difference because I think as an artist, whether it's music or writing or whatever it is, we're constantly having to think 5 years ahead. We're constantly having to think about the long con. So sometimes we'll settle for less right away because we're like, well, at least I can save it, and we're not thinking about. And ironically, that's actually short-term thinking. It's a little bit of penny wise, pound foolish. But I think that we're trying to, and it's also because with TV, with broadcast, you had the Nielsen ratings. You had
Right.
much, and I think one of the problems with streaming is they're not being transparent about how many views a show really is getting. It's this whole like secret thing behind some vaulted locker. And I think the other issue too is when people subscribe to, like, let's say you subscribe to Peacock. Why? Was it a particular show? Or was it just the whole library? Netflix? Why did you subscribe to Netflix and not Hulu? So I think part of it too is a little bit of, and then once you subscribe, that's it. It's not like those streamers are getting more money. So I think it's just such a mess. And I think that the math behind what the WGA was asking for and what I think the AFM wants to ask for as well, it's just fair and equitable. And it really, what is it, 0.001% of really what the kind of profits that they're making. And I do think that one thing that really concerned me was how there were certain shows that once they aired or they were canceled, they yanked them. So I have not had a chance to see the Alaska show, the one with Hilary Swank. I've been wanting to see that, and they yanked it. And I'm like, oh, and it's funny because companies, I understand this is capitalism. A company and I think the analogy is it's like when Revlon, discontinues cherries in the snow lipstick, but my favorite color of lipstick, it's like they got rid of it back in the 70s or 80s. And it is, so you'd find it on eBay for like thousands of dollars, it's like it's cherries in the snow, the discontinued brand. And I understand that companies can do that. But the problem is that for me, and I don't know, this is just my own personal opinion, a TV show is not a tube of lipstick. It's a product. Yes, it makes money, but it's also artistic expression. It's First Amendment. It's art. And so to me, I start thinking, wait a minute, what if I sold a book and it didn't do well? HarperCollins or whoever the publisher is could be like, you know what? We're going to yank this book from all libraries. Nobody, no one can access it. No one can buy it at a store. We're going to take it away from used bookstores. We're going to take it away from every high school library in America. And then I'm like, is that censorship? Is this?
Yeah.
And I don't know why people aren't, that's an area that I'm very interested in,
It's really something that we're not thinking about. You're right. And it's kind of in the background, but it's a big concern of mine right now because our mutual friends, Mel and Skip, who also live here in Las Vegas, hey, Mel and Skip, they, for years were subscribed, and I didn't know you could still do this, to the physical DVD Netflix, right?
Yeah.
So you could get like a really obscure film or just a great piece of art, a black and white French film from 1940 or something. They're doing away with that.
Yeah.
And we don't know if they're going to digitize all that content and make it available.
Mm-hmm.
So the people that are controlling the platform are also going to be controlling the library. And that's really troubling, right?
Yeah.
Because what's going to happen? How are we going to access those films, which Netflix deems not popular enough to put on their platform, or they want to sideline because they're pushing their own content or whatever. It's a big concern because you can't just go and get a video or a Blu-ray disc. You may not be able to in the future.
Yeah, that's true. And that's a really good point. I forgot that, they're doing away with that. And also too, is it an economic and class issue? Because not everybody has state-of-the-art Wi-Fi. Like DVD machines still work. That's probably the most affordable way to get entertainment as well, and then there's the educational component. These are things that are very important for maybe teachers to show. Maybe a teacher is going to want to show some rare documentary or some old film to a class. They don't have access to that now because my husband is a public school teacher. The Wi-Fi's not, they don't have the best Wi-Fi. So they still have the VHS. As a substitute teacher, I've shown video cassettes,
Wow.
in the
Yeah.
VHS thing. We still do that. So yeah, so there are a number of I think bigger issues there as well.
Yeah. Um, that's a really good topic. I wonder if there's got to be people that are working on that now that are like, wait, what's going on? Film historians and things like that.
Mhm.
But in the meantime, with the Writers Guild, how can people that are watching learn more about it and also support it? Is there anything that the Writers Guild is asking the public to do?
That's a really good question. I think one thing, if you are in LA or in New York, we welcome non-WGA members. We've had just people that are fans, or love TV, or are union supporters, or also we have pre-WGA people that are aspiring to get involved and become a member of the WGA. So they're signing up. So we have sign-up sheets that people can go to, and we're there to answer questions, and also too for the pre-WGA people, it's a way for them to kind of network and get mentoring advice. Because the other thing about being in Hollywood is it's an apprenticeship. Because as a staff writer, I learned from the showrunner. I got to go produce my first episodes on set, and that type of apprenticeship and mentoring is disappearing. Because we have one writer writing like all 10 shows, and that poor writer is like
Yeah.
overworked or just whatever. And so I think that we're losing that aspect as well. So that's one way. In terms of should I cancel my Netflix, I don't know the answer to that, so I don't feel qualified in answering that. But I think that honestly, I think just the best way is, also there's social media. You can like or amplify or retweet, WGA posts and things like that. It's also just education. Read up. There are famous books written about union history. Like pay attention to what's happening with UAW right now, United
Yeah.
Auto Workers, and Detroit Strong, because I used to write for the Detroit News and was in that strike. So this is happening everywhere. I mean, this is kind of a zeitgeist moment, I guess. Is that the
Yeah.
word? Where there's a greater awareness of unions and the protections that they offer, and in terms of equity in wages and also safety issues. One of the things, I'm kind of rambling right now, but one of the requests that we had in the WG was a mandatory minimum number of writers in a TV room, for a TV show. And a lot of people are like, well, so and so who writes, like White Lotus, or just one of those shows where all you see is that one person's name. It's their vision. It is like a novel. It's only 8 episodes. But the thing is we're just trying to codify it. And for me, what I think is more important too is I think it's a safety issue, because I've been on sets where, a light fell down and could have killed someone,
Mhm.
And we were very lucky when that happened on set of a TV show. I was like, wow, we have safety issues right before we do a special effects or a stunts thing. And as a showrunner, when you create and write a show, you're being pulled in a million different directions. You might have missed a meeting where that light fell and injured someone. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So it's a safety issue, because the nursing union just recently won a demand where they said there has to be a ratio of nurses to patients. Because if
Yep.
a nurse has way too many patients, they're going to miss someone's pill feeding time, and someone could die on their watch. So to
Yep.
me, this is not just about creativity and equity, and also we have a pension and health fund. The more people that are have jobs, it contributes. God forbid, I don't want us to start eating into our pension 10 years
Mhm.
from now, and that's a legitimate concern. I don't want our healthcare to start to minimize. And so I think it's also a safety issue. I mean, I don't know if you can see it, but my left eye, it's a stress thing. I had like a burst blood vessel, so my eye is actually very bloody. I think you can't see. If I came all the way up to the camera, you could,
Yeah.
but it's really gross looking. And I went to my eye doctor, and the WGA is one of the best healthcare we have eye care. These glasses are covered by health insurance. A lot of times, most companies and most unions don't have eye health care. And I think maybe because we're writers, like we all have glasses because we're
Right.
on our computers all day. But that was something I thought of the other day when I went to see the eye doctor. I'm like, thank God for my union, and thank God that I have this coverage, so we're trying. And I mean, healthcare is a huge thing in our country right now. Not everybody has it. It's becoming more of a privilege than a right, which is unfortunate. So, but I think I'm kind of straying away from your original question. Forgive me.
Yeah, no, I think you're hitting on something that and the thing that is, I think, frustrating is the way the narrative is framed often. Like the UAW, whether it's UAW or nurses or Writers Guild, the reporters are going to write on, writers are asking for a 10% raise or something, but they never talk about how much money the bosses are making.
Mhm.
And I'm sure the Writers Guild could resolve the strike if the employer said yes to your contract demands. They would still be multi-billionaires. Nobody is telling them not to be billionaires, right? But in our country, the economic inequality and the gulf between the highest paid CEO and the lowest paid worker of a company, that gulf is wider in the U.S. than any other country, and I don't think it's sustainable, and I think it's fair. Like if you say, well, a CEO should make more money than an entry level law clerk, let's say, of a law firm, or the person that is working the register at Home Depot versus the CEO of Home Depot. But like when that gulf is like 800 times what that person is making, it's not sustainable. And I think we're reaching a point in our country where people are like, yeah, this is not going to work in the long term. And we live in this incredibly rich country, but in some ways we're very impoverished because we still have people that have food safety issues, or they have scarcity issues rather, and they have no health care. And that's the big problem, right? That's like the global problem. And I was talking to a member of our culinary union the other day, and they're having a strike vote in next week and in 2 weeks. And their economic package is something like $5 million over the next 2 years or whatever. And these are casinos that are making money in the billions. And you're like, well, that's nothing when you look at the big picture. And often in the stories that we read as consumers, and we see like how this is framed, there's often talk about what the workers want, and there's very little talk about what the employers actually still make or will make. And I think that's a piece that's missing in a lot of times.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's about what you're worth. And I think one of the things I'm really glad that I think it was 67% or almost 2/3 of the country support the writer's strike. And I was relieved, because I think one of the things that I get worried about is sometimes people think, oh, you're a rich Hollywood screenwriter, oh, you got paid this amount of money to write 40 pages. That's what I make in a year as a public school teacher, And what I think people forget is that most TV writers and feature screen, especially the feature screenwriters, that's a whole other, they're suffering so much right now. I mean, in terms of not being paid fairly, but people don't realize that the statistic is the average screenwriter, TV or feature, we work once every 2.5 to 3 years. So when you get a certain amount of money, taxes, agent commissions, because you can't work without your agent or your representative, that money has to last for 3 years. So when you start dividing it up, it's actually, it's not, I'm not that fancy,
Yeah.
It adds up. And then, I've been unemployed for 2-3 years. I took the CBEST, I substitute teach K through 12 along with my husband, and he teaches full time, but he said, you got to take the CBEST. He saw where this was going. And so I think people forget about that. And then also too, the amount of time you do spend brainstorming, coming up with the story, or as a musician, I don't know what the statistic is for how often, at least for professional freelance musicians, how many gigs you do a year. But in between those gigs, you gotta save that money that you earned, and then you gotta still practice, because you never know, at the drop of a hat, you might have an audition,
Right.
So there's time, energy, and money that is being spent behind the scenes for writers and musicians that a lot of people don't understand. So when you start adding up all those hours and energy spent, we're getting ripped off. And this is why everyone's striking. And I've been involved with the AFM Yeah, they recently recruited me as a captain, a contract action team member. So if anyone
Great.
who's listening or watching this is in the AFN and you want me to send you informational emails about what's happening in November and December, I'm happy to help out with that. But the musicians are facing a lot of what the WGA is facing, and it's all we haven't even talked about AI yet, but that's a whole other new level right there. So.
Yeah, and screen actors are dealing with that. That's huge in their business. And with musicians, I mean, like all of the residuals that somebody that would score for a TV show like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, let's say, they would get paid when the show went into reruns, or when it went to a foreign market, or when it went to a DVD or a videotape. And all those things are gone in streaming. So that's why this is so crucial, because the whole model of how artists make money in media is changing. And I think you're right, it's across the board for everybody.
Yeah, I think the AFM statistics are that musicians are making 75% less when they work for streaming versus traditional TV and broadcast. And denying musicians those residuals from streamers, it's basically like paying them 25% less to begin with, which
Yeah.
goes against what the minimum wages are supposed to be anyway for them. So it's kind of cheating. And I mean, you have that. And the thing that concerns me about AI, obviously, we know what some of the obvious things are. Oh, they're using your image in perpetuity, or, they're gonna, who really owns the idea or the copyright of an AI generated screenplay that I'm hired to revise, maybe,
Yeah.
and that even takes away step one, because normally I pitch and write the first draft and get paid for it and then rewrite it. So by having AI do the first draft, I'm denied my first draft money. So it gets very murky. One thing that concerns me about music and AI for the Musicians Union is, like in TV, composers, there's a very apprenticeship program. I have a lot of friends that are composers, and they often do the scut work, while the fancy, famous, the James Horners, like the John Williams, they get to do the fancy stuff. And then the younger or the newer composers, they're like, all right, this TV show needs a song by the Beatles, but they can't afford it. So you got to write a fake Beatles song. And so they do that. And that's a way of learning their craft. Like as a staff writer, before I even got to write a script, it's like, Paula, can you write sides, which is the word that we use to describe just a few pages that the actors read for their auditions. And it kind of teaches you how to write in the voices of the character before you actually write the script. These are training steps that are very important. So once AI starts writing those fake Beatles songs, those new composers aren't going to get that training, the training wheels. So I fear that we're going to lose an entire next generation of new composers, and new writers, because we're not getting the proper training, to move our way up the ladder. And also in that training, you find your voice. You realize, oh, I have a certain style of writing music, or I have a certain voice as a writer, and you don't get to discover that in the scut work, the intern stuff that you have to do, and that bothers me with AI as well. That's a big concern of mine.
Yeah, I think it's really a concern as well. And I feel like I've been on my phone and looking at my news feed, and there'll be a story about something that's not really, like a human interest story, and I'll start reading it and I'll be like, this was totally written by AI, because there's no rhythm to the sentences. It feels completely soulless, and I'm really concerned about how that's going to affect, because probably people are composing with it now too, right?
Yeah, it's kind of denying artists the chance to just kind of make mistakes. Because part of brainstorming, whether you're composing or writing or whatever it is, you're supposed to stumble and fall. Like the whole point is, that's the beauty of creating art. You're supposed to make mistakes, and we're not getting that opportunity to do that. And I do want to add really quickly that I think with AI, I do want to say I don't think it's entirely evil, because I think there are incredible tools for AI to help the disabled community, to help, the elderly. Like there are so many different ways that we can use AI. To me, AI, it can be a tool or it can be a weapon, just like a knife is either a tool, you dice onions, or you do something really bad with a knife. So I think that AI is a knife, and it has great, I think, wonderful learning and educational it's a great tool, but I feel right now we're kind of using it like a weapon.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm really eager to find out how we make it through this. And I've been to several SAG-AFTRA rallies here in Las Vegas. We do have a small community of SAG-AFTRA folks here, and so this is not an LA issue. It's really a nationwide issue of how we're going to compensate artists fairly in the midst of these sea changes in platforms and consumption and technology.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think that's great that you're with SAG-AFTRA, off in Vegas. And I do want to add, I just realized the earlier question you asked about how people can help. I don't have the links with me right now, but there are some entertainment funds where people can donate for groceries and for just emergency funds. So if people want to help out that way, that's something as well, because I think we're going to be the longest. They're meeting next week, so fingers crossed. But I think there's a certain date that we're going to surpass. I think the 1980 or one of the older strikes, because we beat I was in the 2007 strike. That was 100 days. We're well past that. We're like on day 100. We're in the 130s, 140 day thing. But I think at some point we may beat 1988, 1980, the other strikes that were because there's one strike that I think was 6 months long. So I think that we're getting close to maybe beating that. So we have to really hope next week that there is progress. Otherwise, I'm going to have to write a lot of books.
Yeah.
And substitute teach again. So
yeah, well, we're all standing with you. And if you're watching and you want to find out what you can do, I think one of the easiest things is to follow Writers Guild of America, WGA, and SAG-AFTRA, SAG-AFTRA, on all your socials, and just stay updated. And
also AFM and
AFM, yep.
AFM and Fair Share for Musicians is what the Local 47 is working on, because they're going to go into negotiations November and December. And am I the only writer that might be on like 2 different strikes? I'll be like the SAG-AFTRA writers, it's like I'm going to be the WGA musician. So hopefully everything gets resolved. But
yeah, well, I want to just thank you for spending so much of your morning with us today here. And how do folks find out more about you or your books or connect with you?
Oh, sure. I'm on paulayoo.com. That's my website. You can follow me, Paula Yoo, at Instagram, Twitter, or X, or I'm still on it for right now. And also on YouTube, you can see my silly cat videos and my silly little violin videos. I do these first take. So I make mistakes. It's all about honest music videos. So I just have fun, with that. And then, and I realized I should mention, so in terms of books, this is, let me go over here. This is my new book that came out a couple of years ago. It just came out in paperback. It's called From a Whisper to a Rallying Cry, The Killing of Vincent Chin and the Trial That Galvanized the Asian American Movement. And it's about the first ever hate crime federal trial on behalf of an Asian American back in 1982. And it took place in Detroit. And I will say that there is some information about the UAW in this. There was a lot of anti-Japanese sentiment because of the trade wars with Japan back in the 1980s. But, I think what is great about the UAW is, there were some not cool bumper stickers that were out, comparing Honda and Toyota to Pearl Harbor. That was not cool. But I think the UAW, they did come around. And I think that's the thing. All unions are, I'm very pro-union, but within our leadership and our membership, we still have to be accountable. And I think that there is a history of systemic racism in unions. I think the Local 47, the AFM Musicians Union, I think we were one of the first unions in LA to desegregate, to join with the Black Musicians Union. And there's history behind that. And I just learned about that recently, and I'm very proud of that. So I think that as we support unions, as with, what I did with this book, we also have to still be accountable and look at systemic racism and also, sexism, with women in the UAW. We have to look at all of that and be accountable and move forward together in solidarity. that's a big thing. And the last thing I'll say is my next book coming out is in spring 2024. I'm doing copy edits. It's called Rising from the Ashes, and it's about the 1992 Los Angeles uprising, or what we called back then the LA riots. And I interviewed the families of Edward Jae-sung Lee, Korean kid who was killed protecting a store during the riots, and the families of Latasha Harlins and Rodney King. And it was a real honor to meet all three families. So
that's fascinating. What a great opportunity to talk to those folks and capture that history. So well, I'll be looking forward to reading that when it comes out. And what was that one called again?
That one's called, it's a very long title. All my books have long titles. It's Rising from the Ashes, Los Angeles, 1992, Edward Jae-sung Lee, Latasha Harlins, Rodney King, and a City on Fire.
Wow. Well, I'll be looking forward to that. And again, it's at Paula Yoo, Paulayyoo, if you're listening and not seeing. And thank you again so much for your time, Paula. It's been fascinating talking to you about your creative life and also how you're turning your need to make money into labor activism around the arts as well.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And thank you for all that you do and for your advocacy and activism, and fingers crossed for SAG-AFTRA as well. And we are in solidarity with IATSE and AFL-CIO and all the unions. And we appreciate, and we at the Writers Guild, we know how much solidarity these other union people have been showing up as well with my fellow AFM members. So the WGA, we will be there for you. You know, I'm making sure all my writer friends show up for the AFM this fall.
That's great. And I think that's so important that we all have to stand together as unions. And it's not just about any one union. It's about all of our power is when we come more together. The more solidarity we have, the more power we have, for sure.
Exactly.
Well, thank you again, Paula. And I look forward to reading your books and following the progress of the writers. And hopefully we'll get together in person sometime when I'm out in LA. That'd be great.
And I go to Vegas all the time. So hopefully we got married in Vegas. And so every Christmas for like 25 years, we spend Christmas in Vegas. So hopefully one day we haven't been there since the pandemic. So I'll definitely let you know when I'm in Vegas.
Absolutely. And you know, Mel and Skip are big foodies like me. So we'll all go out and we'll have a really good cocktail at least. So.
Yeah, poker slots. That's what I do.
Fun stuff. All right. Well, thank you again, Paula. And thanks everybody for joining us. And we will see you all next week.